district is established, the same shall be held in custody by the trustee of the trust funds of the town wherein the school district lies, or in the case of a school district embracing 2 or more towns, by the trustee of the trust funds of that town which the voters of the school district may elect. This article is asking you to vote to appoint the trustees of the trust funds of the town of Bristol to be the trustees of these funds.
The only question I had is, has the trustees in the town of Bristol agreed to do that?
This is not really a matter whether they can agree to it or not. By law, they would have to do this. But yes, of course, we do want to make them aware that this is coming down. I did talk to the chair of the trustees of the trust funds, and while she will have to file an additional page on her report, they would do this, as understanding it's a matter of law.
Janet?
Janet Cody, Bristol. I want to know whether there's any costs associated with this. I mean, are you having to pay trustees to do this? They're elected officials in Bristol, but...
There are no costs associated with this.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Eric?
Yes, one quick question. Will the trustees from the surrounding other towns that are in the school district, will they have any input on this at all, on how the trustees will be spending this money? Is there an allowance for that? Is there a law that states that they will have that kind of an impact?
The other trustees of the other towns, the other 6 towns, do not have a say in that. However, the investing of funds by the trustees is managed by law. So right now they're in the PDIP, Public Depository of what's the full acronym? It's the Public Depository for New Hampshire. And actually all the trust's funds for the town of Bristol are in there, as well as ours. So the investment really is, again, more of a clerical change. And this has been discussed in case law, because I asked them, can the board appoint a trustee from each town? Absolutely not. And the Attorney General's office said they would fight us vigorously on that. The last time they had a case of this, it was nearly a $4 million embezzlement in Keene, where a school board did appoint their trustees, and the individual that stole that money died in jail. So they won't allow that to happen in New Hampshire again.
Thank you.
Excuse me. No. Janet?
I have one more question in regard to the basic treatment of trust funds. Will you be developing an investment policy as a board, or will they be having to adhere to the Bristol investment policy?
There really isn't an investment policy for trust funds that the board can, the way the trust funds are established once they're handed over to the district, or in this case, the district is legislatively formed, it's not incorporated, so they really would be handed over to the trustees of the trust funds of the town of Bristol. Now, the management of those funds, if you want to call it an investment policy, is handled by RSA. I could explain that and read that RSA if you'd like. I do have it up.
The RSA requires an investment policy.
Correct. They would have that investment policy, but it's pretty standard and has to conform to a AAA rated, you know, investment. And I'm sure the trustees would take, just as they do now, investment advice from other towns. I did have someone call me who was a trustee from, I'd like to say Alexandria, but I can't remember, because their funds were invested not in PDIP. And I'm sure that they would take under advisement the pluses and minuses of investing in something else. The school board remains the agent of these funds. They're the ones that would decide how they would be spent and so on. The trustees are more of a guardian to make sure that someone's scholarship fund, 50 years later, the school board doesn't say, hey, you know, no one's touched these funds in decades. Let's just move those over to the facilities fund.
But does the RSA governs us that we have to review and approve investment policy? does the RSA legislate for the school board to do the same?
I believe the whole investment policy and the investment decision is for the trustees of the trust fund.
Okay, they'll go by Bristol then.
Okay, you ready to close debate? Okay. Somebody want to make that motion? Ms. Duncan makes that motion, seconded by Ms. Cross. All those in favor of closing debate signify by saying aye. Aye. And all those opposed, nay. Article 4 will appear on your warrant, on your ballot, excuse me, on March 11th, just as it appears in your warrant today. Article 5, Expendable Trust Fund, Building Maintenance, to see if the Newfound Area School District will vote to raise and appropriate up to the sum of $60,000 to be added to the Expendable Trust Fund, Building Maintenance, and to authorize the use, transfer in that amount from the undesignated fund balance available July 1st, 2014 for this purpose. Article was not included in your operating budget, Article 7, and the school board voted to recommend, and the Budget Committee voted to recommend as well, unanimously. And somebody want to address that?
Okay, I'll just read the explanation from your booklet here. Expendable Trust Fund, Building Maintenance. The article will allow the district to transfer up to $60,000 from the end-of-year unreserved fund balance and transfer those funds to the currently existing Expendable Trust Fund for building maintenance. In essence, this is an account that will allow us to repair or update our current facilities should the need arise. The Expendable Trust Fund currently has a balance of $120,042.67. An example might be if you had a serious roof problem, you had to have a repair done on. It was a significant amount. It hadn't been budgeted for because you didn't see that coming. And so that would be when you might take something out of the Expendable Trust Fund.
You've seen this article in the past as well, for those that have been here. Any discussion, any comments with regard to Article 5? If there are none, there's a motion to close debate. Mr. Hill, and seconded by Mr. Ogier. All those in favor of closing debate on Article 5 signify by saying aye. Aye. And all opposed, nay. Article 5 will appear on your ballot on March 11th, just as it appears in your warrant here today. Article 6, the School Resource Officer. Shall the Newfound Area School District raise and appropriate the sum of $51,840 for the hiring of a school resource officer for the Newfound Regional High School. Said officer will be available to support all schools within the Newfound Area School District and shall be employed for the school year only. If approved, this amount will become part of the default budget for the 2016 fiscal year. This article was not included in the operating budget, Article 7. The school board voted 3-3-1. That's decisive. And the Budget Committee voted not to recommend the article unanimously, 7-0. Mr. Migliore.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. As your school board chair, there is no more important personal goal than preserving the safety of our students and employees. And I can speak on behalf of the entire board to tell you that that is also true of the entire board. And without getting into specifics, on day one of July 1st, when we welcomed our new superintendent, that morning when I went to the office, before I even said hello, I brought up this issue as being of paramount concern, and then welcomed Stacy to her new role. So we made it really clear, and we are taking action on that on a regular basis. There is meetings that the superintendent heads with public safety officials, your school board chair and your school board vice chair, at least quarterly, if not more often. So this is something that we value. In terms of the vote on the SRO, ironically, when a vote is tied, it fails. And that was consistent with the purpose behind putting it on the warrant. The board decided that we would present this to the public to allow the public to decide and have a direct say in the matter. Stacy?
So why are we requesting this? Why is this something new? I know this conversation has come up several times in this district before. There's an increased need to review and enhance our safety and security procedures. In this day and age, we can't be any more careful, any more thinking about our students and our students' safety, our staff's safety. As you can see in front, I've done some history and some research on school shootings. The SRO would be the first person on scene to look at this. We also need to develop district and school level emergency management teams to continue to assess and train. Every single person in our school needs to be trained if there was an emergency. The SRO would help us and assist us in those processes and procedures. A school resource officer would also support and enhance these procedures and assist us in a variety of ways. So what are some of those ways that they might help us, in addition to being available if there was a crisis or an emergency? They would have a primary responsibility for handling calls for services to the school. So if we had a call to the high school, they would assist us with that. They would address crime and drug activities on our school grounds. They would assist and make arrests and issue citations on school grounds. That could be anything from a student's parking to a student's driving. We have high schoolers who are learning how to drive, and assisting them in knowing the rules and regulations is helpful, and having a police officer assist them in knowing that will make them safer drivers on our roads. They serve as a liaison between the school and the police system and the police department. They assist us with developing incident response systems so that we can assure parents and our communities that when our students are in school, that they are safe and that we have protocols in place to assist if there was something to happen. They incorporate the incorporation of law enforcement in our school crisis management teams. They would assist us at the school level. They would assist us in rehearsals and drills and demonstrations, tabletop discussions about how and what would happen if there was a crisis. They would be a problem solver with us in legal issues and school protocols. They would build relationships with juvenile probation and parole officers, juvenile justice counselors, guidance counselors, parents, and students. They would help us and be a link between us, the courts, the juvenile justice system, to help us either help students to get the services they need, to help represent us in court. Sometimes we have students who need services who don't get them because we don't have the ability to get to court. We don't have the legal expertise to help know what students need to get those services through the court systems. They would assist us in resolving problems that frequently require an officer to act as a resource liaison within the school and outside agencies, such as helping us connect students with Katie for drug and alcohol issues and concerns. They would develop and expand crime prevention efforts with our students. They could develop and expand community justice initiatives with our students. So as opposed to students being sent away or students going through the court systems, we could look at juvenile justice systems that encourage students to give back to their community and make amends for what they have done wrong. They can be a real asset in helping us assess that and set that up. They would provide education and information around such things as criminal investigations, alcohol and drug awareness, general crime prevention, conflict resolution, restorative justice, motor vehicle safety, and special crimes in which students are especially likely to be offenders of or victims, such as vandalism, shoplifting, assault. They would help us. As an administrator, our main focus is education, not investigating crimes. And so they could help support us in investigating and knowing what those proper procedures are for investigation. If we hear a student has drugs on them, what is the proper protocol for us to follow so that if they were to have drugs on them, we could guarantee that in court or in the next step of a process, we would have appropriate protocols in place that we could actually work with that student and get them the support and help. One of the things I did do in investigating this was call other schools and get information from other schools as to who has an SRO, so that the community here could identify whether, is this something that just solely Newfound? Or is this something that is happening in the state? I received 45 responses from different districts. Out of those, 34 of them have SROs. And what you see above is the school districts that responded that have a school resource officer. Out of those, 18 of them are reimbursed, the school district reimburses the town for that SRO. The other school districts, the town pays for the SRO to be part of the school as a community resource. So I guess I want to put some information out there because I've had lots of questions, and I'm sure lots of people have questions. I'm hoping to answer those. How did this cost come about? I met with Chief Lewis. We had a conversation. We looked at the assessment. The cost that is up here is a prorated cost for a police officer for 180 days. That is based on an annual base salary, holiday pay, Medicare, retirement, health insurance costs, life disability insurance, and uniform costs. And so we calculated out what that was for an average employee, divided it by their contract year, multiplied it by 180 days, which is where you get that amount of. The question has come up, what if we vote yes on this? The school district side votes yes, and the town side votes no. That would be a further conversation we would need to have with the police department, whether they believe that they could give us an officer to fill this position or not. What happens if the town votes yes and the school side votes no? Again, the town would need to make a decision whether they wanted to give us an officer that we were not reimbursing them for. On the other side, the school district could look and say, well, could we find $51,000 and reimburse the town? But in general, the school district would not have the money to reimburse them. We would, and I'm committed to telling the community, we would continually assess this position. This is not a lifelong position that will happen every year. We will assess it as the year goes on. If we find that it's not a value, or we find that it isn't a resource for us that is effective, then we would not have that position next year. And I've had a conversation with the chief, who has also committed to saying, if in fact we did not continue this into the next year, that they would reduce their officers by one. So that is on the record now saying that. And so that, in general, I believe that moving forward, we have a lot of risk in our schools. Where is it going to happen next? We don't know. But what we can say is that we want to be assure parents and assure our communities that we are doing the best we can for our students and our faculty to ensure the safety of everyone.
We have one more speaker on this from the board, and then I'll call upon you, okay?
I will be very brief. Purpose of this article, Jeff Levesque, School Board Representative from Groton. The purpose of this article is to finance a school resource officer, not to approve the presence of one. Should funding become available from a grant or a private donation, the school board, I'm sure, would look at that favorably and make a move on it. This is about safety, the safety of our students versus the cost of a resource. If we look at the math that Ruby presented for the teacher salaries, Danbury seems to pay the highest chunk. So using that as a basis, this position would cost someone in Danbury the highest amount, $14.40 on their $200,000 property. So when you go to the voting booth and you vote, what I ask you to decide is a school resource officer at the high school worth less than $15 to you? Thank you.
Okay, open for discussion.
Martha Khalil, Alexandria. Through you, moderator, could I have a point of clarification?
Yep.
What is the comparison of the cost of this officer to our highest paid high school teacher?
Somebody answer that question? Well, they're getting the answer to that question. I'm going to call on the next speaker, and then they'll get the answer, and then we'll call them back up to answer so we can move along.
Thank you, Jim Phelps from Danbury. Stacy answered most of my questions, but I would like to hear the Budget Committee's reason for not supporting it.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We unanimously decided that this was not the right direction. It's come up a number of times before. And I believe in the past there have been school resource officers that didn't work out quite very well. If you just listen to some of the comments that were made by the superintendent as to the numerous reasons why we should have a school resource officer, it struck me that I can't believe that we have been able to do without one all along. I mean, gosh. First off, they'd be able to do workshop, they'll be able to do training on protocols and procedures in case of an emergency. That sounds like a really good workshop or two. Doesn't sound like a full-time position. How far is the New Hampton Police Department from the high school? Because we're talking primarily the high school. They say it's for the whole school district, but you know they're going to be right here in this high school, and other than rare occasions of going to the outlying schools. What is it, 3 miles at most, 2 miles? We got told that, wow, that we could be given tickets to our kids for unsafe driving in the parking lot. Well, who gets the revenue from those tickets? The town of Bristol or the school district? And what about the time and cost of the officer then going to court? Are we going to be able to dock his time and bill that to the town because he's not going to be at the school? I might be a little bit more prone to it if I knew that we would no longer have to hire any police officers anymore for school events or meetings such as this, because we had our own officer during the school year. So there are so many reasons, but I think if you really ask yourself deep down, if we are in such critical need for a police officer at the high school, then what about the middle school? And what about each of our elementary schools? It's a slippery slope. And how do you decide to say, yes, one school is more insecure or unsecured than the other? And we just thought it was opening up a can of worms, and that we have not seen in this district a demonstration for the need of this, considering our excellent response capabilities with our local police departments. Thank you.
Eric?
Yes, Fran, you wouldn't have to go to the next door to get the police department. You just pull the one that's sitting out here in front of the high school half the time, or you can pull the one out in front of the cemetery, or in front of Garland's house, or, any one of these that usually glued to one of our state roads over here. The town of Bristol is already paying what, $1.1 million a year for our police protection. Seems to me like they could put a cop in here for 8 hours and it wouldn't faze anybody. I'd like to ask a question. Was it Chief Lewis that brought this forth to the school board to put this police in? He was. Okay, all right. Well, it's interesting that I have a department head that works in the town of Bristol who does not live in this town, does not live in this school district, bringing an article in here to impose on our taxpayers. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And I keep hearing over and over again, if we get that 10th cop, they could unionize. Well, wouldn't that be just a big plus? This is wrong. I don't believe in a police state. My high school had 2,700 kids in it. We didn't have any cops standing there. If you have a cop standing here and someone comes through the back door with a gun, what is that cop going to be doing? How is he going to prevent? How did any of these get prevented? Any of these deaths get prevented by having police in the schools? Did any of them get prevented by having police in the schools? Well, there's police in the schools. And if there was police in those schools, how many of those deaths would have been prevented? It's usually after the fact that everyone says, well, hindsight's a 20/20. We could have done this. We could have done that. Could we have done this? Could we have done that? If someone's going to do something, they're going to do it. They're going to get away with it. The drugs, the alcohol, the weapons, all of that. The only way you could stop anything from happening on our schools, you'd have to have a lockdown, a search on every pupil coming into our schools every day of the week. Am I wrong with that? Somebody correct me if I am.
Okay, thank you.
Again, I don't see how a department head who comes to this school board is permitted to even put something like this in here when he doesn't even live in the district. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, one more thing, Mr. Moderator. Let's take the $51,000 and retain some of the people that they want to lose out of here.
Thank you.
Hi, Nora Foster of New Hampton. So I have 3 questions and then a comment. I like your graph that you have, but have you put any local data, particularly when we got the school population that's going down? I'd be interested to know what are the number of incidents, deaths, and injuries just specific to our school district? Is there any data available?
You're looking for local data?
Yes. This is U.S., across
Yep.
the U.S., which obviously
Yep.
there are a lot of economical.
I think I heard the answer was no, we don't have local data. We've had no deaths, we don't have local data.
Okay. My second question, if this were to go through, what additional costs beyond salary would the district have to absorb, such as training, benefits, or is the police department willing to absorb those additional costs?
Yeah.
Sorry, tall, so I'm a little above this. What additional costs beyond salary would the district have to absorb, such as training and benefits, or is the police department willing to absorb those expenses?
You're looking at, is there any additional cost beyond the $51,000? That's basically what you're asking.
Yes.
Okay.
The 51,000 is what I worked with Chief Lewis in our discussions. That does include all benefits. It does not include training, but it does include uniforms. So we sat down and looked at it. And depending on who the officer was, depended on how much training they needed. There would be no additional cost. This is what we, as a school district, as the superintendent and I worked out together. If this were to happen, we would meet extensively and develop a memorandum of understanding on what the role of that person was and what that looked like.
Okay. My third question is, what specifically is the trade-off to afford this position? So I understand that there are potentially some staff cuts that were proposed to come up with this additional $55,000.
When this position was proposed, it was not taken into consideration cutting other things at all.
Okay. So my final is just a comment that I wanted to say that although putting in the warrant that out of a number of districts in New Hampshire, how many schools actually have this officer in place, I wanted to bring it to everyone's attention. That doesn't necessarily mean that we need to do this. Other school districts have dedicated principals to their schools, and we don't actually have that. I know in our elementary school we have a principal that is shared between two schools. So where there's a will, there's a way.
Thank you. Now, we have one question about our highest paid. The first question was asked about the highest paid teacher, and how does that compare to what we would be paying for the officer? Can you answer that?
Based on current staff we have right now, the highest paid teacher is $61,750.
And did you want to respond to Mr. Rottenecker?
Just wanted to address a point Eric made. I'd like you to take yourself back to July 1st, when Stacy first arrived on the job. And before I said hello to her, I told her about school safety as being the #1 priority for myself as chair and the rest of the school board. She's very thorough. And one of the things that she did was come up with an additional proposal for the school board to consider, which was a school resource officer along those lines for safety reasons. This was not the initiative of the police chief in Bristol, and I wanted to make that crystal clear.
Okay, Mr. Ozier, next.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. As I understand the recommendations made by our 2 leading groups of the Newfound Area School District, both the school board and the budget committee have elected not to support this article. Even though it's a tie on the school board's part, legally, they are not supporting it. So based on that fact that both bodies say do not vote for this article, I move to amend Article 6, be amended to read $0 rather than $51,840.
Second. Okay, that's moved by Mr. Ogier, seconded by Mr. Simard. And I think you've already spoken to your motion. The motion is to amend Article 6. The amendment to Article 6 would be to amend the amount of the appropriation from $51,840 to zero, which in effect would provide the school district with no money. I guess it would authorize them to have the officer, but no funding in order to support the officer. So, everybody understand? Now we're going to just discuss just the amendment. So I'm just going to take comments or discussion with regard to the amendment itself. Everybody understand that? Okay. And sir, we'll take you next.
Paul Manganello, Bristol, New Hampshire. I was timely because I was going to suggest something similar, but now that I can speak to it, the amount of funding that's out there right now is literally signing a blank check, because we have to wait for a memorandum of understanding between the police department of Bristol and the school board.
Thank you. Slim?
I support the amendment that's been offered. At the Budget Committee hearing we had a couple weeks ago, I asked the question, was a cruiser going to be included in this cost of $51,000? And I was told whatever was needed for their service was going to be provided. That was the answer that night. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Simard?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, members of the board. I speak in favor of the amendment to substitute zero. The original article, the original amount of $51,000 was presented, and the police chief at a selectmen's meeting was asked directly whether that included insurance, whether that included a cruiser, whether it included vacation time, and all those things that we would normally pay a police officer, and he responded yes. Now, we also asked if it included health insurance, and he said yes. Now, if we take a police officer who has a family and needs a family plan, that could be upwards of $15,000 to $20,000. And if that $51,000 includes that, I'm afraid that police officer is going to be working for peanuts. But I believe that the police chief was less than candid when he stated that figure. A couple of years ago, he presented a $72,000 figure to the previous school superintendent, which did include those items. So what, in effect, that would do would leave the taxpayers of Bristol on the line, because it would be a Bristol police officer, for a cruiser up here, for all those benefits, for the insurance. So we in Bristol are already paying 31% of the school budget, plus we'd be paying an extra for that amount over the $51,000. And in all fairness to the taxpayers of Bristol, I think this is a big piece of money to chew off. Also, we have New Hampton right on the other side of Davidson's campground, and one of the old mottos that Representative Riley always used to tell me is, when seconds count, your police department is only minutes away. When seconds count, your police department is only minutes away. If we were going to negotiate something and keep the safety of our children in mind, I think we'd want to look to New Hampton. Their police department is right across the river, just the other side of Davidson's campground. So when seconds count, they're only minutes away. So I'm in favor of this amendment. Reduce this down to zero. Let's come in later on, and if we don't adopt the amendment, let's kill this whole warrant article and really research it. We're not limited to Bristol. We spoke with the sheriff of Grafton County. Jurisdiction is no problem. Jurisdiction is not a problem. We don't have to hire a Bristol police officer. We can hire a police officer from any one of these towns and have them sworn in as a special sheriff, under the sheriff's department, special deputy under the sheriff's department, and they would have the jurisdiction to do this. Bristol, the taxpayers of Bristol are not in favor of hiring a 10th officer. We don't need it. We don't want it. We cannot afford it. Thank you.
Mr. Hanser?
Steve Hansen from Bristol. I'm also in favor of the amendment. My issue would be, is I've got 3 children, elementary school, middle school, and high school. How do I explain to my elementary school child that he's not worth the protection that the high school's getting or the middle school's getting? So I don't see how a school resource officer in the high school is going to help every district. It's not every school. It's not going to. So I think the money's worth going back to the teachers where it belongs, not in the resource officer. That's it.
Thank you. Les?
Leslie Dyer, Bristol. I happened to be at the same meeting that Mr. Simard was at where Chief Lewis was speaking about this, and my understanding was that $51,000 and change is exactly what it would cost. So obviously the salary is negotiated to include the insurance package. So the only additional cost that I heard from Chief Lewis that evening was that, in fact, we would be providing a car. I'm assuming, and you shouldn't do that, but I was assuming it would be one of the cars, the town cars that aren't being used constantly for other uses. I don't know that. But in fact, I did hear that, and that is clearly what he said. To speak to the other issue, what I also heard Chief Lewis say that evening was that this officer would not be based solely at the high school. That this office, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this officer would be moving around to the elementary schools as well and the middle school. So this officer would be covering the district-wide. And to speak to why it should be a Bristol officer is they would be based out of a Bristol location. So I would assume that that would mean they would need to be a Bristol officer, but I don't know that to be the case.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Amy Lynn, Bristol. I was just wondering, Fran made a comment about it sounded more like a workshop that could happen rather than hiring a resource officer. And Vincent said his #1 priority is school safety, as well as the whole school board. So I'm just wondering what workshops or classes have teachers, support staff, and administration been sent to or brought in to learn preventative measures and protective measures for their students? And have any speakers been brought in to address the safety needs and fears that students are feeling because of different school shootings that are happening?
So you're asking whether or not there are currently any workshops or have been any workshops that have been offered or any outside resources to address those issues? Is that
right?
Okay. We should be, but I'm going to let her answer the question right now rather than disrupt the meeting, okay?
Sorry.
So I will respectfully disagree with Fran that emergency management is a workshop. We take it seriously. We have every school has a district level team who meets at least monthly. They have a police department and a fire department. They rotate around. We are required by law to have monthly drills and practices. We have created a district level emergency management team to meet and again to process and plan and practice exercises. I meet monthly with all of the police and fire chiefs. So there is a lot more that goes into emergency management than a simple workshop.
Thank you. Okay, you ready to vote on the amendment? Okay. Anybody who wants to speak, they should come to the microphones now because I think we're getting about ready to close the debate on the amendment. So, yes, ma'am.
April Nguyen from Alexandria. I graduated this school in 1985, and I have lived in this school district ever since then. I am totally in favor of the amendment. Fran was right on when she said that Newfound has had a resource officer before, and it did not work out. I will not go into the specifics of why, but I am telling you, Newfound does not need a resource officer. It is not a good idea for our school district, and I encourage everybody to vote no on this.
Thank you. Janet?
Uh,
Okay, if anybody else wants to speak, come up now. Otherwise, I'm going to close debate after Janet, okay?
I'm in favor of this amendment because I think there needs to be more research for a solution for our district, which is a 7-town district. There are issues of jurisdiction. There are other things that are important, and I also do not have any evidence as yet that we need somebody full-time for the school year at the high school. And that is what has been reported by the school board, their intention of this article in the first place. And it is also a school year article, and our police chief stated at a meeting of the select board that he intends this as a full-time position, the summer being training for this officer. So I'm not sure that we're all on the same page.
Thank you. Okay, is there a motion to close debate on the amendment? Mr. Phelps up there. And a second? Mr. Bianchi. Okay, so we're voting on the amendment, and the only purpose of the amendment, somebody stole my program here, so I have to borrow Mr. Migliori. So. This is on Article 6, the resource officer. And so the amendment would now read, shall the newfound area school district raise and appropriate the sum of $0 for the hiring of a school resource officer for the newfound regional high school. So the amendment is to amend the article to replace $51,840 with $0. Everybody understand that? So if you vote yes for the amendment, you'll make that amendment and replace that dollar amount. If you vote no, we'll go back to the original warrant article as it was written and is presented in your warrant. I'm going to try to do it with a voice vote, but I'm not sure that's going to be very successful. But all those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Nay. I think the ayes have it. I'll call that. And the amendment passes. Do you want to debate any more of the original article itself?
I just have, Susan Duncan, Bristol, sorry. I have one question. Going back to my budget committee days, I thought when the deliberative session zeroed out a line item, then the body in charge of that budget cannot spend any money because it was the will of the people should this be adopted. However, had we put in $1, they could have put it they could have moved monies around between line items. Am I remembering old statute, or is it if we specifically zero it out and it's adopted by the people at the March 11th session, then they cannot spend any money on this? Thank you.
That's a question which I don't know the answer to, but we do have a legal representative here, Attorney Lawson, who is here with us today. I think the question is if you have, if this were to pass, I guess, and it were to pass with a zero amount, can the school district move monies from other categories and actually expend money in this category? You'd probably come to the microphone, Ed.
It would be my, can everyone hear me? Yes. Okay. It would be my opinion that this constitutes what is referred to as a special warrant article, and if monies are not appropriated under that warrant article, the school board cannot utilize other funds by moving money among accounts as they normally can to fund the purpose of that warrant article. That'd be much clearer if the article were defeated, but in this case, it's not authorizing them to spend any money on this purpose. Is that?
No, yep.
Have I explained that?
Yeah, I think
okay,
so.
Thank you.
What happens if the article is defeated?
Well, if the article is defeated, the same thing applies. They can't spend money for that purpose because it was defeated.
Right. Thank you. So I think, Ms. Duncan, you're right, is what he's saying. So, okay, are you ready to vote on the article itself? Oh, Mr. Belbin?
I'm going to speak on the original article.
The
if I
original
may.
article.
Yeah, Lloyd Belbin from Bristol. Some of you probably know I spent a lot of my time in working on police work. I'm very familiar with this issue. So I'm going to speak from what I know about this and what I work with. And first off, I want to say you shouldn't be too alarmed about this. What the news media is putting out there, the superintendent's telling you this and everybody. I've worked with police work, and I've been in all phases of it, through the ranks. We had what we called a safety officer when I was there, a school of over 30,000. The safety officer did the same job, which now they give it a fancy name, resource officer. It's a lot of baloney. They're going to train this, he's going to do that. I had him working for me. I know what it's about. Believe me, I wouldn't want any of the kids in be any other safety issues at all. But I want you to understand that this, you're not, by voting this article down, you're not putting your children in jeopardy. And I went with the past superintendent, Dr. Phil, over to Interlakes on my own to look over the safety over there with the safety officer, resource officer, still safety officer to me, a resource officer. And I looked at their surveillance cameras. And I was very impressed with the surveillance cameras, and the safety resource officer was a nice person, was doing a good job. And we talked it over, and I was very impressed. And I came back, and I wanted to get the surveillance in the schools here. We do have a surveillance system. We spent about $90,000, and I'm told it's all working and up to snuff in all the buildings. And I think, and he told me over there, the resource officer, it was the best tool he ever had, and it's doing the most that even he could do. Believe me, with that, let's give that a chance, and I think we're going to find this very good. And I could say more on this, but I don't want to take your time up. But
okay, thank you.
Don't be afraid to vote this down. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, at point of order. Yeah, we're discussing the article, the original warrant article, as amended. I don't know exactly what the purpose of the discussion might be, because we've just had the discussion that by effectively amending this to 0, there's no way that they can go forward. And so unless it's amended again to a different number, it's pretty academic at this point. Is that? Well, no, I'm going to give this lady, if she wants to address something, I'll give this lady, then I'll take your motion, Janet, after she has an opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Sheila Miller, Bristol, and I teach at the Newfound Regional High School, and I just want to say that I am in favor of a school resource officer because, one, that's not my job is to teach. And while we've not had any deaths in the district, I can tell you I was part of an incident, a very scary incident, probably close to 8 years ago, where I was on bus duty and there was a student with a knife, and we did not have a resource officer at that time. It just so happened that a police officer was driving by and stopped what could have been a very, very scary incident. And so I am in favor of a school resource officer so that I can do my job, which is to teach.
Thank you. And a motion, Janice just made a motion to close debate, and is that seconded by anybody? Okay. Your name, sir? Ken Hall. I should know that. I'm stupid for not knowing that. Ken Hall seconded that. So we're going to close debate, and this will be on Article 6. And if we close debate, you vote yes. What's going to happen is this is going to appear on, it will appear on your ballot. It will appear on the ballot on March 11th, but it will appear in a different form than it appears here in your warrant article. It will appear with, instead of the $51,840, it will appear with a 0 number. Everybody understand that? Yes. Okay. All those in favor of closing debate on Article 6 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Okay. Okay, and so we move on to Article 7, the operating budget. Shall the Newfound Area School District raise and appropriate as an operating budget, not including appropriations by special warrant articles and other appropriations voted separately, the amount set forth on the budget posted with the warrant, or as amended by vote of the first session for the purposes set forth therein, totaling $21,802,569. Should this article be defeated, the default budget shall be $22,264,557, which is the same as last year, with certain adjustments required by previous action of the Newfound Area School District or by law. Or the governing body may hold one special meeting in accordance with RSA 40:13, 10, and 16 to take up the issue of a revised operating budget only. The school board voted 5-2 not to recommend the article, and the budget committee voted 7-0 unanimously to recommend it. And who is speaking to that?
I'm just going to introduce Stacy, Mike, and I believe Jeff has some comments on the operating budget. So I don't have anything to say about it other than we think that the number that the school board came up with is quite reasonable, and I think we can get by with that. So, Stacy.
I think I need to grow a little bit. Okay, this year, what I have for you up is a historical review of the budget, so you can see where we have been and where we are going. Fund 10 is your general budget. That includes all your salaries, your benefits, all your supplies, transportation, anything we need to run our schools. Fund 21 is food service, which is encompasses all of our food service funds. Normally, food service is a self-funded program. In this district, we are at a deficit. Mike has been working on improving that so that we do become a self-funded program, but there is money actually in the budget, about $25,000, to supplement that service. The grants budget, which is 22, is literally a self-funded budget. Those are grants we receive in, either through adequacy aid, through special ed, those kinds of programs. We can't spend more than we take in. So those are called enterprise funds. What we get in is what we can spend out. Combined together is the number that you see on the warrant article for the 14-15 school year. I would like to point out that the Fund 10 budget is $213,262 less than last year's budget. It is also $66,674 less than the year before's budget, the 12-13 budget. One of the things we did when Mike and I started this year was to really take a serious look at staffing, to take a serious look at change. How can we improve instruction? Keeping that as our main focus. And so with that, we created a new budget. We met with principals. One of the things we did this year was called zero-based budgeting, which was we started with every principal had a zero budget. They had to let us know what they were spending, so supply lines, what did you need to buy, equipment lines, what did you need to purchase, and we were able to look at that and assess and analyze what we were spending our costs on. We looked at staffing. We had lots of conversations around that, making adjustments, and I'm going to talk a little bit about those as we go on. So again, we worked collaboratively to ensure we were creating a budget that met our students' needs, that worked towards increased educational outcomes. We want to make sure we are providing a great education for our students and the outcomes for our students are continuing to grow. But we also know that we have a tax cap that we had to live within, and we also know that we need to regard the taxpayer of these communities, and that times are continuing to be tight, and we wanted to be cognizant of that fact. So what were some of the changes that we were looking to make for this upcoming school year? One of the first things I identified when I came into the district was we have no one other than myself overseeing really curriculum and instruction. That is what we do as educators. We work on curriculum and we work on instruction. We have great things happening in individual schools. We have nobody looking at the overarching picture. And so what I'm requesting in this budget is an addition of a curriculum coordinator who would be at the SAU level, who would assist us in looking district-wide. I am filling that role right now as best I can, and this is how the position has been filled. The superintendent is expected to take on this role. And while you can do it, is it effective? Is it really impacting our students? One of my goals is to develop a real K-12 and a 12 to K conversation. Right now, it's difficult to get, our fifth grade teachers aren't talking to our sixth grade, our seventh grade, and on and on. So I want to open that dialogue, and having somebody really overseeing the most important thing we do, I think is vital in continuing to improve instruction. We are looking to add 3 special education teachers, well, 2 special education teachers and a Title I teacher that would come out of a grant. And I'm going to just jump down to a reduction of 19.5 paraeducators. I know that doesn't sit well with our paraeducators. One of the things that we are really trying to shift our focus is on looking at improving instruction and putting more teachers in our classrooms to support our teachers and to support our students, and less paraeducators. We have some great paraeducators, and I don't want anybody to be offended by that. It is more about, we have teachers go through training, teachers are certified to teach, and we want to put the best instructional models in front of our students. And so this is a shift from using paraeducator support to using teacher support. And so that will help us get there, so that when we are in the classrooms, our teachers are supporting our teachers in instructing our special education students the best way we can. There's also a reduction of a second grade. This is a grant-funded position that can only be utilized for 2 years, and so we're reducing that position that's grant-funded. There was a science position here at the high school that we are reducing. It's a retirement, and so we are not going to fill that position. We are continuing. We believe that we can meet the needs of the high school without that position. We also have an increase of $100,000 for support staff, for administration, and for people who are not in either of those unions. So we have specialists who work in that. One of the things we have discovered as a new SAU team is that we have an agreement for our support staff, and there's been several years where our employees who maybe have been here for 7, 8, 9, 10 years, there were several years that those employees did not move up in salary, but we are now hiring new employees at higher rates. And so our employees, we have some employees who have been here for 7 or 8 years who may be on step 2 or 3, and we are hiring new employees in at a higher rate. And so the board has put $100,000, that includes FICA and retirement and all those other costs, so the benefit is not really $100,000, for us to work as an administrative team to try to solve that problem, to reward and to catch those people up on pay who have not been compensated fairly. We should not be paying new employees more than we're paying senior employees who have been here for a long time. And so at some point I will come to the board with a proposal for that, so that the board can look at those costs and make a recommendation. Some increases and decreases that have happened just naturally. Teacher retirement, we have 5 teachers retiring this year. All 5 of them have been senior employees and have been here, some of them more than 40 years. So there was, part of our contract is a retirement stipend when they retire, and so that was about between $75,000 and $80,000 we needed to add to the budget to cover those costs. Transportation costs for Project Promise, that is our after-school program. As part of the grant application last year, we needed to start to own some of the costs of that program. We need to start to take every year, it's a 5-year grant, every year we need to start to take on some of those costs. And this year last year was budgeted that we planned that we would take on the after-school transportation. So students who stay in the after-school program, this is basically a late bus to get them home at a cost of $35,000 for the whole district. Workers' comp was an increase of 14.73%. Property and liability insurance had an increase of 6.3%. Health insurance, our guaranteed maximum rate came in at 9.6%. That is the maximum amount that they will increase our health insurance rate. We will shortly receive those rates, and it may be lower, but that's the maximum amount that it will go up. So we have budgeted that increase. Technology went up, and that is part of last year. We had a 5-year plan that the board approved and the state approved, and that outlines all of our technology resources, and it outlines what we need to buy for technology. One, to keep pace. Kids are now technology driven. Oftentimes I think that they have more information than we do as adults and are much more tech savvy, and we need to continue to meet those needs of those students. We are moving to a